For this video, I'm going to engage in farm talk. Now, I was raised on a ranch, not a farm, but I don't exactly get up every morning to wrangle cattle. The most wrangling I ever do now is to untangle the USB cords on my computer, which for some reason seems to be every morning. I'd like to know what goes on in the middle of the night. Oh, never mind. So, I think I have enough country experience to understand the subject at hand, which centers on Cedar the goat. This is a weird tale of pettiness and emotion. Unfortunately, Rashad Ritchie got so caught up in feelings that he completely missed the story. No surprise there. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With cold, blunt analysis cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's time for the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
Well, why do we care about Cedar the goat? First, it's a weird story. Second, it illustrates why it's so important to ask good questions when listening to a story, especially if it's Rashad doing the telling. Here we go.
Seizing a child's goat, citing a ridiculous rule, and then they decided to barbecue and eat the damn goat. It was a pet.
Damn goat? Man, that's rough. First you get barbecued and then eaten. Then you get called a damn goat by an obnoxious internet gadfly. Just to be clear, he's never going to cite the rule in this video that he just spoke about, which is too bad because it might explain, at least partly, what happened. And no, it was not a pet. It was livestock. A goat could be a pet, but not if it is raised on a farm and sold for auction. That's livestock. Of course, the girl thought of the goat as her pet, but even if so, a pet is nothing more than personal property, at least in California. More on that in a moment.
The girl wins $300,000 now due to the police and their malicious conduct. So a child has finally received that $300,000 settlement after her pet goat was slaughtered by deputies. Indisputable covered the story when the traumatic incident first occurred. Jessica Long discovered where her 9-year-old daughter's pet goat was, and it was too late to save it. Sheriff's deputies had seized the goat, named Cedar, in 2022, while he was staying at a Northern California farm.
There is a fundamental rule of ranching. Never let your kids name the animals. If you're not sure why, you'll probably figure it out by the end of the video. Keep in mind that the goat was probably raised on some tiny earth muffin, tree-hugging organic farm. This is Northern California, after all. So take the word farm and ranch very loosely here. Where I grew up, there would have been no controversy here at all. I raised a doggie named Mildred when I was young. Those of you who are Sooner fans will know why I named it Mildred. I was probably about 9, and I grew attached to it. One day, my dad decided it needed to be slaughtered. Guess who he told to shoot it? All the crying in the world didn't save Mildred's hide that day. Sorry, Mildred. I honestly tried. I'm telling you this to let you know that there is a huge cultural divide here. Rashad, who wouldn't know the ass end of a cow from the ring in its nose, is not going to understand the views of the fair and county officials. I do, but in all honesty, it appears that they really screwed up.
They delivered him to Shasta County. These were fair officials, okay, who claimed that the county owned the goat. Court documents say Cedar was later slaughtered, according to the documents, and the family sued county officials.
This was an auction, and it appears that the fair was operating as the auctioneer and the county as the buyer. When I first scripted the video, I had the fair and the county confused because I thought the county was operating the fair. Not so. The Shasta District Fair is actually a state agency, not a county agency. So there appears to be no formal relationship between the fair and the county.
Now, the county and its sheriff office will pay $300,000. Excuse me, the taxpayers will pay it actually, courtesy of the taxpayers here. DeLong's family is part of a settlement agreement. The deal approved by the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of California, judge said Friday, quote, is the first step of the Long family moving forward, said Vanessa Shakib, the family's attorney. Quote, we can't get justice here because Cedar can never come home. Shakib, co-founder of the nonprofit Advancing Law for Animals, which specializes in animal law, told the Washington Post.
Animals, even pets, are purely property, but the attorney is trying to treat Cedar as a human being, a purely emotional argument. Considered as property, you can get justice here because the county and the Longs settled. How can you agree to the settlement and then claim you didn't get justice? I'm not sure what the attorney's claim is here. Did the Longs actually own the goat? If not, then I don't see how the Longs have any standing in court. So we have one question that needs answering. Who owned the goat?
She added, quote, but what's important is that we make sure that this never happens again to another family and that government officials understand that animals are not property. They are family members.
Again, this was a goat raised on a farm and exhibited at a state district fair. It is not a pet and certainly not a member of the family. Again, the attorney is trying to humanize the goat for purely emotional reasons. And by the way, she's kind of hot. I'm talking about the attorney, not the goat. I mean, she could be one of Trump's lawyers. Again, I'm not talking about the goat. Usually Rashad likes to order his interns around with,
put up the picture, full mask.
And we didn't hear that from him, so the intern probably stuck this in there without his permission. The attorney is white, after all, and not being accused of bad behavior. In fact, this is probably the first white person ever shown in Indisputable that he wasn't accusing of sordid acts.
So here's what happened prior to the settlement. In June 2022, Long and her daughter exhibited Cedar for potential buyers at the fair, the district fair. This was called the Junior Livestock Auction in Anderson, California, according to the lawsuit. On the auction's final day, the girl decided she could not bear to lose her Cedar. Okay. But fair representatives said withdrawing was prohibited. Man, please. All right. So they said, no, that's prohibited. You cannot have your pet back. Insane, right?
Depends. If withdrawing is prohibited, then this sounds like what we called an absolute auction, as opposed to an auction with reserve. Rather than denigrate the fair's claim, one could inquire further. Is the fair correct in its assertion that sellers are not allowed to back out once the gavel hits the table? But again, Rashad has fallen for the Cedar as pet angle. This is not Rover the dog. It's a goat.
So Cedar, who was about 7 months old at the time, was auctioned off for $902. Fearing the goat would be slaughtered for his meat, Long's daughter cried, refused to leave the animal to fair officials, the lawsuit said.
$902 is a lot of money for that size of a goat. Actually, that's probably more than you would pay for just about any goat. But keep in mind at these auctions, bidders typically place a lot more money on the animals than they're really worth because it's like a 4-H deal. So they're trying to give the kids money. They're opening their wallets. Whatever the case, it appears the animal was actually sold. Did the seller, Long, try to back out of the deal before or after the auction began? Regardless, I'd always thought that this was a civil matter between the seller and bidder, so I'm not sure why the fair got involved. Or perhaps the fair maintains some authority over the possession of the animal until the exchange completes. I've never seen that done at a farm auction.
Long took her daughter and Cedar home, telling fair representatives that she would pay for any financial losses her decision caused, according to the lawsuit. Worried her county neighbors would be upset, Long took Cedar to a farm in Sonoma County, California. Okay. More than 200 miles away.
The court isn't going to care that Long offered to pay for the goat, but it appears that Long has broken a contract with someone here, and the breaker of the contract doesn't get to settle matters on their own terms. Note the distance of 200 miles. More on that later.
What are they doing? They're hiding Cedar. Okay. Cedar hot right now. Got a warrant out for his arrest. You got to hide him. They're trying to seize the damn goat. And so she not only says, listen, I care much more about the happiness of my child than the money you're talking about. So let me just go ahead and pay for your trouble, and we'll work it out that way.
I hope Rashad never claims to have passed any courses in civil law, because everything gets by him here. The question here is simple. Who owns the goat? If this was a reserve auction, then Long owns the goat, and I don't see why she has to do anything here. However, the fact that she feels she has to stash the goat away makes it seem as if Long doesn't own the goat and she knows it. In such a case, she's trying to hide someone else's property. Also, notice that Rashad fell for the "she tried to pay off the fair's expenses" argument. This is the old, "yeah, I ran into his car, but I offered to give him $500 to pay for the damages and he wouldn't accept it. So, what's his problem?" Again, just because Long offered money to settle the issue doesn't mean that the fair has to accept it. Now, was it smart for the fair to refuse Long's offer? Well, I'm not sure because I don't know what Long offered. The fact that they had to later pay $300,000 looks terrible in hindsight. But that's because the fair doubled down and did something truly stupid, as you'll soon see.
So she goes 200 miles away where she thought Cedar obviously would be safe, according to the lawsuit. Here's what happened. Later in June, a livestock manager at the fair called Long and demanded she return Cedar. The next day, Long sent a letter to the fair that said that 3 of her daughter's grandparents had died within the past year, and that she could not bear the thought of her losing Cedar, the lawsuit says.
Whose fault is it that the girl lost her grandparents? Personally, I don't feel that such a statement ever belongs in a lawsuit. It's emotional drivel. What if the fair came back and said, the winning bidder was counting on that goat for its barbecue and not having it caused many of the kids at the barbecue to cry? Is this how you settle civil suits?
The fair denied their request, and the goat was then seized and slaughtered. That is what happened. Obviously, I got some questions. Number one, why were they not charged with conspiracy? I'm talking about the fair officials and everybody else, because the initial lie was, no, that is prohibited. No, it's not. That's not how property transaction works. There's no contract if there's no sale. So you telling me I can't have my pet back, even though there's no contractual transaction?
Rashad, you bonehead. You can't charge anyone with conspiracy because no crime was committed. This appears to be a civil dispute. Going by your legal logic, the courts would be filled with conspiracy defendants because most civil disputes involve one party being wrong in its claim that it was acting within its rights. By the way, you just claimed that the goat was sold for $902. Depending on the rules of the auction, that could be a contractual transaction. And quit calling it a pet. In summary, Rashad sides with one party even though he's not sure what the auction's terms of agreement are, all the while claiming that no transaction took place even though it sounds like one did. He then claims that because the opposing party dares disagree with his interpretation of who owns the goat, they should be locked up for conspiracy. Remember, everyone, this man claims a Juris Doctorate.
We'll come back later tonight. So this was the first manipulation, obviously, for whatever purposes, criminal or civil.
Manipulation? What's he even talking about? He doesn't know.
And here we are. Now, naturally, that child does not give a damn about the money at all. She much would prefer to have Cedar back. I remember as a young child, Love my dog who died, and that ruined my whole damn week, month, year.
Again, a purely emotional argument. The dispute here is between the child's mother and the fair. Just because you lost your dog when you were a kid doesn't mean that the fair is in the wrong. And by the way, the fact that Rashad claims to have lost his dog when he was a kid means that he probably never had a dog as a kid.
So I get it. So, Ben, I don't understand how everybody, dear brother. I mean, all of these grown people are this heartless, and all they wanted to do is eat the goat.
I doubt the fair officials ate the goat. We don't even know who ate the goat, and those who ate the goat probably had no inkling of this dispute. They may have been just as surprised as anyone that the goat was considered a pet by a young child. If they had been told, they might have even given the goat back to the kid. But who knows?
It's very confusing. At the beginning of the story, I was going to make some sarcastic jokes, and then I just remembered I have my son Henry Horse sitting right here in my lap, and I actually got teary-eyed for the second half of the story instead. It's just so weird when people, how much in this country, how often we value commerce, we value business, we value money over heart and love and care. And I mean, a child's goat, like what kind of Dickensian
Right.
evil character do you have to be to do that to a young girl? And was the goat needed for some big job? The goat was barbecued.
That was the goat's job.
I mean, at least you got $300,000, which I think is a fair amount of money in compensation for this. If I were this young girl, just to spite the county, I'd spend all $300K on goats. I wanted to have hundreds of goats. I wanted to be drowning in goats.
I thought he was going to say that he would spend the money on the county officials' opponents in the next election. That would at least make some sense. Instead, he went for stupid. Now, if you're smart, you may be thinking, why did a child get any form of settlement at all? Well, it's because of happenings that Rashad never bothered to tell you. Let's go to the Los Angeles Times. After deputies took her pet goat to be butchered, girl wins $300,000 from Shasta County. A 9-year-old girl who fell in love with the goat she raised for the Shasta District Fair was heartbroken when deputies, wielding a search warrant, confiscated the furry livestock, taking him away to be butchered. Okay, by the way, I have found out there's a lot going on with that search warrant, but let's just hold off on that for the time being. 2 years after the scandal erupted, Shasta County has agreed to pay $300,000 to the girl's family to settle the legal dispute over the floppy-eared brown and white goat named Cedar. The young girl had raised the goat for the 2022 fair as part of a program intended to teach youngsters how to care for farm animals, and based on the outcome, how to raise farm animals for joy and profit. But when it came time to sell Cedar and turn him over to be butchered, Jessica Long's 9-year-old daughter couldn't do it. Long took the goat away from the fair, offered to pay for the costs, and pleaded with fair officials to let her daughter keep Cedar. Instead, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office deployed deputies, search warrant in hand, to drive hundreds of miles across Northern California to find and take the goat from Billy's Mini Farm, where Long had taken him until the dispute was resolved. I would love to know how they found out where the goat was. Someone ratted out on Cedar. And can you imagine sending 2 deputies, they're being paid full time, to drive hundreds of miles to get a $900 goat? And it's not even clear as to why the deputies were even involved, but they're way outside their jurisdiction. I mean, they were probably on the road for at least 4 hours. During that time, did they not ask themselves, is this really worth it? I mean, you could be fighting crime in Shasta County. You could be rounding up felons with warrants. You could be serving eviction papers. You have nothing better to do than blow a full day to go after a goat. Okay, we move on. It is not clear who contacted and instructed the sheriff's office to get involved. And by the way, The fact that they settled out of court for so much money indicates that whoever got a hold of the sheriff's office doesn't want anybody to find out. That was probably the reason why they went ahead and settled. It's because there's a lot of information here missing that would have been filled in if this had gone to court. This is what happens when you try to do petty stuff and think that you can keep it covered up. We move on. The case caused an uproar, and in federal lawsuit, Long and her daughter alleged deputies wrongfully took out a search warrant, seized Cedar, and turned the animal over to fair officials. Attorneys also accused county and fair officials of using law enforcement to intervene in what they said was a legal civil dispute over who owned the goat. So here is where the county made a serious mistake. This is a civil matter. Sheriff's deputies have no business getting involved, so why get sheriff's deputies involved at all? Furthermore, they drove way outside their jurisdiction to capture the animal. In so doing, it appears that they violated the owner of Billy's Mini Farm's Fourth Amendment rights. And all this for a goat. Seriously? I hope it was delicious. Cedar, who was bought at the county fair for $902, was butchered, but it remains unclear who did it. You hear that, Rashad? It remains unclear who butchered it. But again, they probably don't want anybody to know, which is why they settled. On Friday, U.S. District Judge Dale A. Drozd approved the settlement that requires Shasta County to pay $300,000 to Long and her daughter to settle the federal suit out of court. Why federal? Probably because this involved a violation of civil rights by law enforcement. Unfortunately, this litigation cannot bring Cedar home, said Vanessa Shakib, an attorney representing Long. But the $300,000 settlement with the County of Shasta and Shasta County Sheriff's Office is the first step forward. This settlement brings about a partial end to what has been 2 years of litigation between Long and Shasta County and fair officials. 2 years over a goat. How much money has been burned up on this? Not only just the settlement, but you have all these county and state officials working on this, when they could have just given the little girl her goat back. During the last 2 years, Shakib said fair and county officials have engaged in obstructionist discovery tactics to avoid answering key questions about what happened to the goat and what role officials played in seizing and destroying the animal. So it sounds like they were deleting text messages, deleting email, and telling each other to keep quiet about it. Years later, this case still has several unanswered questions, she said. After 2 years of reviewing texts, emails, phone records, and depositions, Shakib said county and fair officials have yet to make clear who butchered Cedar, what happened to his meat, and who got sheriff deputies involved in the dispute. Text messages uncovered during the federal lawsuit suggest that fair officials wanted to keep secret what happened to Cedar and who was involved. That's right. You have fair officials going through all this to keep this lady from finding out what happened to a goat.
Kathy said, okay, but no one needs to know about this.
B.J. McFarland, livestock manager for the Shasta Fair Association, wrote in a text message on July 22, 2022, to Shasta Fair Chief Executive Melanie Silva. In the message, he referenced Kathy Muse, a volunteer for the 4-H program and an organizer for the county's barbecue.
You, me, and Kathy are the only ones. It got killed and donated to nonprofit if anyone asks.
Okay, so it appears that the fair conducted the auction and the county won the auction because it needed an animal for its barbecue.
We are a nonprofit,
Silva responded. Ha 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 ha. Very funny. Long's attorneys have argued in court that finding out who killed Cedar and who contacted law enforcement is key to their case. Long and her attorney reached out before the goat was butchered and told sheriff, fair, and county officials they were disputing ownership of the goat. Uh-oh, if there's a dispute in the ownership, why were deputies involved? That's civil. So was the goat sold in the auction or not? If so, if the gavel fell, the sellers can either back out of the deal or not, depending on the rules of the auction. It's no different if you sell a TV at an auction and the winning bidders destroy it. The fact that the child went boo-hoo-hoo because she felt it was her pet has no bearing on anything. Now, unlike Rashad, I went and found the actual lawsuit filed by Long, and if the contents of the suit are accurate, then the picture of what happened here clears up a great deal. The telling of the story by Rashad and the LA Times is way off. You can expect that from Rashad, but the LA Times should have done a better job. The lawsuit also indicates that the levels of stupidity and pettiness exhibited by the county and the sheriff's deputies is staggering, and explains why they shelled out so much money in a settlement over a $900 goat. Stay tuned for my reading of the suit. I will post a link to the lawsuit in the description below. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.